And many of the families chose to continue this year and say that they've never had this kind of a relationship with their kids, and they're so glad they did it. Others, it wasn't as easy because, let's face it, if you are in a bit of a schedule where you as a mom can go do what you want during the day, be it work or socialization while your kids are at school, and that gets taken away from you, you can be kind of cranky. So they had to learn, what they were willing to give up and what they were willing to change. And it's been good for a lot.
Okay, I have Bobbie Luymes with me. I used to call you Miss Gray, and this is the Carla Rad Show, and I'm so excited to talk to you because you were a home educator. You were also the homeschool, what do you call it, like a director, coordinator? I'm not sure what you call yourself. What do you call yourself, Bobbie?
Well, I'm a homeschool facilitator.
Gotcha.
That's what they kind of call us.
Yeah, and you have been a teacher for a lot of years because you taught me when I was very young. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to get too much into age here, but I am 40 now. So that means that you're a little bit older than me, just a few
A
years.
little bit,
Yeah.
a little bit.
But it's really cool too because your daughter is my media person. So she's like here right now, and we were kind of chatting and making sure we got things organized. So it was really cool to be able to talk to you, and to be able to see kind of where you've gone. And also to see that we're still connected. Like you were watching my kids when they were little, your daughters were babysitting for me, you taught me at school, and now we're like still connecting, and it's so cool. So Bobbie, let's just let our listeners know a little bit more about you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, what got you into a teacher, kind of whatever you think is relevant.
Okay, well, myself, I'm originally from Saskatchewan. My husband is from Alberta, the Lacombe area. When we first met, I was working in Red Deer teaching in a private Christian school. And we married and we lived in Lacombe area for a little bit, and then the Warburg area, which is just southwest of Edmonton, right between Leduc and Drayton Valley. And then eventually we moved back I moved back to the Edson area in 2003. I came back here. My husband took a job in the area for a local farmer, and we've been here ever since.
Yeah, and you've raised 3 wonderful girls.
Oh, good quality adjective there.
Yes, yes, there you go. So tell us then what got you into home education? Because that you didn't start there. You started as a teacher in the schools.
Yeah, I was never going to homeschool and I was never going to marry a farmer, and I've done both. So you never say never. I was still working at that private Christian school in Red Deer. And just as I was getting ready to go on maternity leave, my first daughter was born middle of September of that year. And the homeschool coordinator that was working through that school at the time came to me and said, would you be interested in teaching art and music at a monthly gathering that we have at the one of the centers in Red Deer? I can't remember what it was called now. And she said, would you be interested in doing that once a month when you're on maternity leave? And I thought, once a month, I could do once a month, as long as music and art meant VBS songs and crafts. I can do that. So I did that. I went and I brought crafts and songs, and the kids sang, and we did things for, about an hour once a month. And they had a lending table of books there. And I started taking books home to read about homeschooling. The little bit of experience or exposure I'd had to homeschooling before that were children who were in that school I worked in Red Deer. They seemed to be a bit of yo-yo students, I called them. They would come for a few months and go home to homeschool again. And then the next year they'd be back, and then they'd be pulled again. So I had to say my respect for homeschooling family was low. I thought, pick a field, pick a side, stay on it, commit to it. They just seemed to be a bit wishy-washy about it. So when I decided to read about it, I realized there was a lot more to it. And I have to say, God started working on me about this child that we just had and what future children we were going to have and how they were going to be educated. I didn't think there was a question. I just thought I'll send him to the local school. We were living in the Lacombe area. It was probably going to be the local private Christian school because my husband had gone there. All the rest of the family in the area went there. I just thought it was a given. But God changed my perspective, and I shared what I was learning with my husband. He read a few of the books, And he was on board right away. He said, it makes sense. You're a teacher. I said, no, it doesn't make sense. I'm a teacher. So it's going to be hard for me to change my mindset. But we made the decision when Hannah was quite small still, not even school age, that yeah, we were going to homeschool. And then when she was about 3, we moved from the Lacombe area up to the Warburg area. So there was a bit of a break. So it was a little bit easier to go into the homeschooling eventually because I had no ties to any of the traditional schools in that area. So we began with Hannah. She was our guinea pig, and we went from there.
Yeah, and you were actually my homeschool facilitator when I was homeschooling my kids, because I started homeschooling them when they were young, and
Yep.
at least the first 3, I guess. I think by number 4, maybe I had them in school, or maybe he just got kindergarten at
Mm-hmm.
home, something like that. But anyway, so that was really kind of cool too to see that. And of course, I was homeschooled for part of my education as well. So it's like there's a lot of kind of homeschool things here. But I think it is interesting that you're a teacher and you're really very much in the system and learning the rules and very much kind of quite adamant about this is how you do it, right? And all of a sudden it's like, oh, there's another way. And I think a lot of people don't even think about that being another way. So what would you say, Bobbie, from what you've seen? Okay, you've been in the school system and you've also homeschooled. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, don't homeschool. Your kids will have bad social skills. They won't get to do A, B, and C. What do you think are the benefits of homeschooling?
Well, I always tell people the main benefit I feel for our family was that our family was the main influence on our girls. So if you think of concentric circles, you've got your circle in the middle, and that would be the main influence on our family was our family. So the mom, the dad, the siblings, we were the main influence. And then outside of that circle, as it gets bigger, the next one would be our church family, because we're always involved in a church wherever we lived. And they were the next level, step removed, not as influential as the family itself, but there. And then outside that one would have been our community. And for us, it was 4-H. We are involved in 4-H and also the local community hall, not far from where we were living. We got involved there. So that was our community. And that's where kind of the friends and the peers aspect came in. So they were there, but they weren't the main influence, meaning they weren't seeing each other. My kids weren't seeing just their peers, or mainly their peers, 5 to 6 days a week. They were seeing family, and friends were once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks. And that to me seemed like a healthier balance than the other way around. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I think that's what a lot of people are concerned about because they're not going to develop these social skills. But I guess it really depends on what type of social skills you're after and also what type of influence you're after. And I think that it's quite easy to see that some of the peers are maybe not the best influence. On the other hand, I suppose there's probably some parents that maybe aren't the best influence either. But assuming that most parents that would home educate their kids are probably, reasonable type of parents, then it does make sense to me because you want to influence them.
And there's socially inept people everywhere in society because they're all human.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when people say, aren't you concerned that your children were going to be socially stunted? And I said, well, if you've ever met my firstborn, I don't think she was ever socially stunted. In fact, she was our social convener the entire time she lived at home. And there were weeks at a time when we were homeschooling where I would make the proclamation, no more socializing this week. We're not going anywhere. We're just staying home and getting some schoolwork accomplished. Because in the homeschool world, when we were living here in the area, they had homeschool skating in the winter, Mondays 1 to 3. And they had homeschool swim Fridays 1 to 3. And there were also other events going on throughout the week. You could have been going 3-4 days, almost 5 days a week if you wanted to be social. We had to make the choice to do 1 or 2 things and stay home and get the schoolwork accomplished, because socialization is wide and varied in the homeschool world.
It is. And I think that's sort of something that could be argued too for homeschooling is that, okay, maybe you send your kid to school and they get a lot of, they know how to maybe socialize with their peers really well, but do they know how to socialize with adults, with little kids, with a lot of different, and they're even just their family? Do they learn how to get along with their family, or do they just go off to school, do their thing, and then come home and fight, right? Like there's that too, right? Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of that in this last year. last year, especially when families chose to homeschool for the very first time because they did not want to partake in the COVID restrictions that were coming into some of the public schools. They didn't want to risk the yo-yo schooling, they called it, where they would be at home for a while if there was an outbreak in the school and then back in the school. They just wanted it to be consistent. So they stayed home. And boy, did they learn that they didn't necessarily have a great relationship with their kids or their kids with them. So it was a lot of discernment had to come into play this last year. And many of the families chose to continue this year and say that they've never had this kind of a relationship with their kids. And they're so glad they did it. Others, it wasn't as easy because let's face it, if you are in a bit of a schedule where you as a mom can go do what you want during the day, be it work or socialization while your kids are at school, and that gets taken away from you, you can be kind of cranky. So they had to learn, what they were willing to give up and what they were willing to change. And it's been good for a lot.
Yeah, I know I was tempted to. I mean, yeah, the yo-yo schooling, as you call it, that was getting a little old, especially, with my
Mm.
younger kids, they can maybe adapt a little bit more. It's the older kids that are getting close to graduating and stuff that it really starts to affect them. And it's
Mm.
very difficult. Of course, we had the whole thing where, we've got 6 kids and only so many devices. So we got more devices from the school, but then somebody forgets their password. And then, the internet's not working. Now it's lagging because the Wi-Fi is not fast enough because we live in the country. And so there was a lot of problems. And so the teachers did their best to try to work through it, but let's face it,
Mm.
it's just not quite the same. So
No.
and I've done both. I've done homeschooling where I get to decide what we're doing, and then I've done the homeschooling where we're trying to kind of go along with what the teacher has. And I would say, if you're going, don't compare COVID homeschooling with
Mm.
real homeschooling, because when you are actually doing it with your kids, you get to choose the curriculum, you get to look at through the program of studies, what do we need to accomplish, and then you can figure out how to accomplish it. You don't have to do this book, you don't have to do it in this way, you don't have to be here at this time. You can combine grades, you can do a lot of same, there could be a lot of overlap. So I think it's like, don't think of that as real homeschooling, because it's not as disastrous and painful as the COVID idea of homeschooling was for most of us.
No, it wasn't. And I had a friend say, how did you do this? Because I'm going crazy. I can't handle being locked in my house with my kids all the time. And I said, sweetie, we were not in a pandemic of any shape, way, or form when we homeschooled.
Mm-hmm.
We could pack up and go somewhere. We could be involved in an activity at Bear Lake. We could just play outside because we have been blessed with living in the country everywhere we've lived on farms or acreages. So it was great. It
Mm-hmm.
was the kids could just run and play and do their thing, and it wasn't an issue. But and we could go to events in the city, to museums and the science center. It was not the same as what they were doing. So
Yeah, I think homeschooling, yeah, if you're going to homeschool properly, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but you got to do it differently than you do in the classroom. There's a certain reason
oh
why
yeah.
you school in the classroom, because you're dealing with a lot of kids. There's a lot going on. When you're homeschooling, you can sit and read a book. And like you said, you can go to the city, to a museum. You can, watch a movie and discuss the movie after. It's so much more flexible. And as
Mm-hmm.
long as you're still hitting those main targets and the kids are learning what they're supposed to learn, you're laughing. It doesn't have to be done in a certain way.
I know I often giggle at my new families. Well, I'm not sure if the mothers will say, I'm not sure if my child is at grade level. And I kind of giggle. Okay, we're not worrying about grade levels right here. We are concerned with them progressing. Grade levels were designed to educate large groups of children. Um, and even report cards were designed to let the parents know what they're actually doing in these large groups in these buildings all day long. You are the parent, you're doing majority of the teaching. Like you said, you were doing parent directed for a while. They know if the child understands it or not. They know if the child is catching on to the concepts. You're there, it's not a problem. Online is a little different. You need to, as a parent, be watching what they're doing, kind of supervising it to make sure they're staying on task,
Mm-hmm.
because the minute you get off task on online schooling, that can snowball very quickly and you can get behind. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, you have to be committed. We weren't always that organized, but we had fun. And you learn that each child is so very different. After I taught my firstborn and then my secondborn, who's sitting there with you, she was a different person. I could not do what I'd done with the first one with her. I had to kind of just crumple that up, chuck it, and redo it for her because she was a very unique learner. Same with the third one, looking at her in a different way. And it made me think, boy, when I was teaching in the classroom, I was teaching a curriculum. I wasn't teaching children. And I felt like I should go and apologize to all these parents. I wasn't doing the best for your child. I was just trying to get through the material. I'm really sorry. Please forgive me. Because you just get caught up in that in a large group and trying to get through the material that your school has purchased and would like to be used. It's a little bit more difficult to be individualized in a setting like that. But homeschooling is a lot like tutoring. So you can meet the needs a little quicker and a little bit more in a bit more of a unique way.
Yeah, and I think as a parent too, it's like, oh, but I could never do math, or oh, I could never teach my kid how to do this, or you can always get a tutor, you can get some help. There's like online things. There's a lot of resources out there, so much more than when I was homeschooled as a kid.
Oh, yes.
And so many resources. And I think you find what works for your kid and also what works for you as a parent. Because, sometimes people are like, oh, try this. And I look at it and I'm just like, I don't understand this. And so if I don't understand it, I'm not going to be able to teach my kid it. So I got to find something that I can relate to and that makes sense for me so that I can get it across to my kid. But there's so much out there, right? And I think, like you said, every kid is so unique. So it really gives you that opportunity to teach that kid and to really get to know your kids. I feel sometimes like when they're in the school, it's like, okay, what are you learning? What grade are you in again? Like, who's your teacher again? Like, what are you doing at this time, right? And so I think it's easy to lose that connection. Whereas when you're homeschooling them, everything that's going on, providing that you're doing most of the teaching yourself. Obviously there's ways to do it where they're more online, but like you could just keep tabs on them a lot easier and find out where they're progressing, where they're lacking, what they need. And I think that's pretty unique. That is like pretty special with homeschooling that you don't get in another situation.
It is. I will tell you one story that my middle daughter taught me. She was more of a late riser and a late, retirer for getting up. She'd get up later in the day and then she would go to bed later in the day. And I was always, no, up early is more noble. The earlier you're up, the more noble you are as a human. And I was always forcing her to get up early and do things. And she kept saying, Mom, I'm a more productive worker later in the day. And I remember one day I had tried to get her to write a book report all day. And she was just like this at the table, sleepy and not really focusing, looking out the window. And so eventually they went to bed. And I remember I was sitting in the living room working on a computer, and it was probably 10 or 10:30. And she came out of her bedroom and she plunked down the book report in front of me. She goes, I wasn't kidding when I said I'm more productive in the evening. Oh,
okay.
Duly noted, and sure, like letting her sleep in and letting her have that time was fine, and it worked better. As she grew and went off to Bible college and such, there were early classes. Even with you, she's got to be there some early mornings for those workouts.
6 a.m. Yeah.
Yep, she can do it.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be something she would choose to do 24/7, but she can do it now. She's an adult. She's got the wherewithal, the stamina, but I had to learn that she was different than the rest of us and let her be that way.
Yeah, it's nice to have the flexibility to do that because there's so many things in the classroom where you're just like, that kid really needs this, but I don't have time because I've got to get through this material. And that kid, oh man, they could really use a break right now. And I can tell that kid, you know what I mean? Like you can see it, but you're like, I can't really do anything about it. Whereas when you're home, like I know I had kids that had different needs. And sometimes I'm like, go outside and play. You can come back in half an hour. We'll get back to this. But it just like was pulling teeth. They're not getting it. And that happens in the school setting too. They're just not getting it. It's going over their head. But if you get them at a time where they're more focused, maybe they get a snack, whatever, all of a sudden it's much better. And I'm not to say like, oh, the school system is all bad. I mean, they're doing the best with what they have, right?
Yep.
It's just not always ideal. Okay, so tell me why I think I know why, but why are more and more parents moving to home education, especially lately?
Well, there can be a lot of reasons. Some people are just honestly disillusioned with the way the traditional system is going. I think it's getting too big, might even be bankrupt at this point. Too much bureaucracy. And let's face it, the funding doesn't make its way down to where the students are working. It tends to sit up where all the administration is and kind of sit there. And I think people that are in the system know this, but they feel powerless to do any change. And that's been for years. It isn't just a new thing now. So there's some disillusionment with that. And maybe their child has special needs. They're unique and they just haven't been able to get any help. And coming home just seemed like the better thing to do. And some of the families, they're faith-based, and they find that the traditional system is pretty much antagonistic to their faith and getting more so every year. So that is another reason why they would choose to stay back. And some did not like the COVID protocols that were going on in the schools. That pushed a lot of people into homeschooling that had been thinking about it. And a majority of them have stuck around. I'll give you a quick story of a local family I'd never met until last year. They had 3 girls. The oldest was going into grade 7. And I got a panicked phone call from the mom. We'd already talked a few times about the middle of October, and she said her oldest daughter really can't read well. She doesn't know any of her math facts. She has to use her fingers, or she has to have a chart with them to remember what they are. And she can hardly put a decent sentence together, let alone write a report. And she was panicked because up to that point, this child had got decent marks in school. She was one of those kids that just kind of flew under the radar, didn't cause any problems, didn't draw attention to herself, and was just getting by. So I said to the mom, it's okay. This is a special opportunity for you to work on, I guess, what is traditionally called your 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic. We'll work on those because they chose parent-led, not following the Alberta Program of Studies in an aligned program. So that daughter went back to grade 4 math, because in the program they were using, she could do an assessment, and that's where she was. So she started in grade 4 math, and she used a program that I recommended called Brain Integration Therapy to help with the reading and the writing. And when I did their second visit in March of the following year, that girl was writing letters to friends and relatives who lived far away. She was writing stories. She had read several series of books for kids pretty much her age, for like young teens. And she was reading out loud to her younger siblings and enjoying it. And she was just finishing up grade 6 math, and they'd already bought the grade 7 curriculum. And they were going to be finishing that in the summer because they were planning to move to a different city up north. And they were going to be entering the school system then, but she would be right where her peers were, because they took that time to almost like tutor her, get her writing skills, her reading skills, her numeracy skills top notch before she went back to the school. Anything for social and science, she'll pick up quick. It's simply theme oriented, and she can do that. So I was really proud of her. She worked hard.
Yeah,
but I'm glad. Yeah, and I'm glad the parents figured that out before she was like grade 10 or 11.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's so cool. And I know with my kids, I know when I put them into school, I think they were grade 4 and 6 or 3 and 5, I think maybe it was. And so, one of my kids was already a grade ahead, just because that's the way it went, right? And when you're home educating, yeah, the grades are less important. It's just more important that they get through the material, that they progress, that they're like getting the skills that they need. So it's very kind of interesting how it works. Okay, so what do we need to know that we haven't talked about yet? What do we still need to know about teaching, education, and students in general, Bobbie? What would be something that would be helpful, whether home education or whatever, from your experience? Because you've had quite a few years doing this.
Yeah, well, let's say what becoming a homeschool mom did to my teacher brain was made me realize that the way we teach people traditionally here in Alberta is not the way that everybody across the world does it. My middle daughter and I went to Portugal several years ago with one of those EF tours, and it was just a breath of fresh air to see a country that did education differently, and it was successful. So there's many ways to educate a child, and I think we should have the freedom to choose what we want to do for our kids, for our family, be it traditional public education, charter schools, private schools, homeschooling. Alberta is one of the friendliest homeschool provinces in Canada, but a lot of families will choose to do it at a great financial sacrifice, because one of the parents who might typically work stays home. And so that income is lost, and they don't get any support from the government, though they are taxpayers. They don't get any education money to help do their children. So it just know that there's not one way to teach children, and everybody is unique. So it behooves you to figure out how your child learns and to help them that way.
Yeah, man, I could say so much about this because I'm so passionate about education, because I'm a teacher too, right? I think a lot of people know that I'm a teacher. So I got my teaching degree. I homeschooled. I've also taught in the system, and I've seen it, and I've gone through kind of the whole evaluation of it. And when it comes to the politics, I
Yeah.
just feel like it doesn't make any sense to me that there's a publicly funded education system where you have to learn in a certain way. And then other types are either less funded, like certain private schools are either less funded or not funded at all. To me, it makes
Mhm.
sense that certainly, okay, so if you want to have it publicly funded or whatever, then what about something like a voucher where, Bobbie, I give you the money
Yeah.
for your kids. You get to go pick what school you want your kids to go to based on their needs. So maybe there's a special needs school, maybe there's a Christian school, maybe there's a music school, maybe there's an art school,
Oh,
maybe there's all these different types of schools, and your kid can excel in certain areas, and you get to choose what's best for your kid rather than putting them in one system that is trying to target all of the kids in all the same way, regardless. I'll give you a quick story too. So Jason and I went to university together. It was very sweet because we were just newly married. So we were holding hands in class and it was very sweet. But anyways, when we would get to the test, I would always get a higher grade because I learned quickly how to do multiple choice, true and false, and those kind of things. I would memorize facts. I had almost like this photographic memory. I'd memorize it and I'd go and do it. But when I actually wanted to know what was going on, I would ask Jason. I would say, okay, Jason, tell me how this all fits together. He would tell me it clearly, exactly how. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. So he actually knew the material better, but I would get higher test scores because of that. So I went through the system. I became a really good little system schooler, right?
mhm.
And so I could
And you
read the system,
can. Yeah.
but I didn't know what the heck I was doing in the end, right? So that's why I think, like, just from that story, I feel like, man, there's definitely gaps there, and there's a lot of different ways to learn. And Jason had such a better grasp on it, but he wouldn't get as high marks on the test, right? So yeah,
Yep.
there's a lot of reasons to look into it. I think that's the thing. Everybody is unique. Everybody is special. Everybody has different gifts, different challenges. And I think we need to
Mhm.
really look at that and say, okay, what is best for my kid? Not what's easiest,
Yeah.
not what's, cheapest even, but what is ultimately the best thing.
Yep. True. And it's different for every child. And I'm glad we did it. It was not always easy. There were days I thought I wasn't doing a good enough job, but then I sat back and I thought, I remember having those same thoughts when I was a teacher. Oh, this is interesting. It can hit you anyway, no matter where you are and what you're doing. Um, oh, there was something else I wanted to say, and it's kind of lost my train of thought now. But oh, when I go subbing in the past, when I've gone subbing into the schools, um, I use a lot of the stuff I found out about while I was homeschooling, different resources and curriculum. Like I have the program I use with my girls to teach them how to write. I love that program, and I would teach those kind of things to the kids at the school. Like, don't you know how to do a keyword outline? Let me show you something. This is great. You'll never plagiarize again. To the grade sixes, and it was just great. I loved it, and it used the different. If I ever went back into the system, I know I take a lot of the things that I used and that I'm even finding out about now from my homeschool moms, even though my homeschool days are done. I'm doing interviews every day. I hear about these amazing resources that are out there now. I bet you I would use those in a classroom.
Hmm. Yeah, there's so much. I do the same thing. Like when I'm subbing, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna try this, and this is gonna be so fun, and I get excited.
Mhm.
You know. But I think like in the end, you want to, there's certain targets you want them to hit. But again, if they're progressing, they're learning what they need to learn. I mean, when we used to do what was it, science, I got this book about astronomy. And so it's like learning about space, the stars, the universe. Oh my goodness, were they ever interested in it? They just loved it. And we could just focus on it. The pictures were amazing. I think you told me to get the books. And then there was another book on, I can't remember, I think animals and it was so interesting. And they were just like, when can we read that
Mhm.
book? They couldn't wait. And I think it's
Yeah.
like, if you make it interesting and they're learning what they need to learn, and same thing with like history. Sometimes you can just read a novel that you get all the idea of the history and you actually have
Mhm.
a really good grasp rather than just, which what I learned to do is just memorize the date and the person and put it on your test. But you have no idea who that
Yeah.
person is because what did they do again? Or, you just memorize it
Oh,
for a
I
test. But I mean,
know.
that's just me. And maybe too, like I don't have maybe the best memory or whatever. I had a concussion when I was young. And so, I maybe forget a few things. But I just feel like there's so many different ways to do it. And the more ways that you do it, the more you're going to target those different learners. And I
Mhm.
do think that a lot of teachers, there are really good teachers out there, Bobbie, right? They're doing the best with
Oh,
what they have. But
oh, totally.
there's also holes in the whole system, right? And so I think, why can't that teacher or that special needs aide or that special needs educator, whatever, be able to make more decisions right here, in the
Mhm.
trenches, rather than having sort of the bureaucrats telling them how it should run when they're not actually there.
Yep, that's the biggest problem. I don't think it's the teachers. I think it's the way the system is set up. And the bigger is not necessarily better. So you can be lost in the shuffle very easily. And another thing that parents are always concerned about when they want to look at homeschooling, especially for high school, will my child get into post-secondary institutions? And I encourage them, yes, they can, because not everybody that goes to our local universities or colleges are from Alberta. They come from other provinces, other countries. There are entrance exams for those people to write. Your child can write them too. You just have to contact that school and say, what do you need for my homeschool child to get them in? And a lot of times it's a portfolio of their work and samples. Some places will even have the parent and the child come in for an interview. These are more private colleges, tech colleges. There's one in Calgary like that. They interview you to see what kind of a relationship do you have with this child? What is the character of this child, more so than their marks? Mm-hmm. So there's ways to get in. The people that run these colleges want students to come because their tuition, this tuition from that student pays their salary. So they're going to do what they can to get you in. Because let's face it, with most things in the world, if you scratch away at the surface, it's about the money.
Yeah. In the end, it's about the money. Yes.
It is.
Yeah, exactly. Well, anything else you would add, Bobbie? And then I want you to tell people, parents, where they can go for more information if they are interested in home education.
Yeah, I like that question. I think the first place you should go to is if you have a friend or family member that's homeschooling, talk to them, pick their brains, ask what they do. And then there's the Alberta Home Educators Association, AHEA, and they are very knowledgeable. These are some of the people that started homeschooling in the 1980s when it wasn't as friendly toward, the government wasn't as friendly toward homeschooling as they are now. So they really did forge a path for those of us who homeschooled later. They're amazing. They know all the things. So get a hold of them. Yeah, just go with people that you know. I've had so many people, like last summer, if I would have been getting a commission for everybody that was phoning or coming over to my place to talk about homeschooling, I'd probably be retired right now.
Nice. Maybe you need to look into that, good business model for you, Bobbie.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Bobbie, for sharing. I mean, I really feel like we could talk probably a lot longer because this is a really interesting topic. One more thing I just want to say is that there's more to education than just grades, than just English, science, math, social studies. There's a lot more that our kids need than just those marks. And so I think like looking at education as a whole is really valuable.
Yep. It's really good. Yeah, it's The Whole Hearted Child is one of my favorite books that I read before I started homeschooling by Sally Cookson. The Wholehearted Child. It's just a really good book. So yeah, there's lots of books out there, lots of things you can do, but talk to your friends. They'll let you know.
Cool. All right. Thank you so much, Bobbie. Really appreciated this conversation.
Thank you for tuning into the podcast today. I absolutely love that you joined us. I love being able to record these, and I love our guests. It's been so much fun. So thank you. Please like it, share it, comment, do all of the things that you feel like you want to do if you enjoyed this podcast. I really, really appreciate that. And this podcast has been brought to you by my company, Power Fitness Online. So everything that we do locally with our workouts, with our group nutrition coaching, and with all of the other fun events and stuff that we run, we put all of that online. So now you can access everything, even if you're not locally, don't live in our area. So my coaches and I and all my staff, the whole team, we are putting so much work into these workouts. We're filming 5 fresh workouts every single week so that you never have to do the same workout twice. We're also doing group nutrition and personal nutrition coaching so that you get exactly what you need. And you know what the best part is? It's the community. The absolute best part is just knowing that you have the support, that you have the encouragement, that you have everything you need to succeed. So go to powerfitnessonline.com.